Hi, everybody, and welcome to the Dr. Psych Mom Show. Today, I'm going to be talking about expectations and how they mess up your life. And so, as usual, I take no stand at all. I have no opinion. No, just kidding. I always have an opinion. Otherwise, you wouldn't listen. Before we get to the expectations and how they mess up your life, let's talk about subscribing. As always, the most recent subscriber episode was the myth of the no-win situation. This is something guys say a lot. Oh, it's a no-win situation. It's a no-win situation. And then I'm like, here's how you could win it. And then they pause and they're like, no, I would still lose it. No. Women do it sometimes too, as well, as I'll discuss. And so, you could listen to that episode and about over 170 more. Okay, so expectations are discussed frequently in therapy, and if you compare yourself to other people, you've got to pick the right people so that your expectations are not completely delusional, because this will truly mess up your life, your relationships, your friendships, your work, your parenting, everything. So some common ones that I see are in the realm of expecting your kids to be better than they are, expecting your partner to be better than they are, and expecting yourself to be better than you are. So, we can take some of these individually. Obviously, if you are comparing your child to your best friend's child who's like a straight A student, honor roll, captain of his team and a nice kid to boot, then you're going to be depressed like all the time, because you cannot compare. You cannot just choose, the best case scenario for a comparison point. And if you're like, yeah, well, that kid really exists, so then why isn't my kid like that? Well, he's one in a million. So why don't you pick like a more average kid? Sometimes I have people actually look up, what average people are like of whatever age, and they're like shocked. Like I was, working with a younger person once, and he thought that all people in the age of he was in his 20s, had X amount saved. I was like, why don't you look up and see the net worth of people that are 20, whatever years old? He was shocked. It's like no money, obviously, and he had thought, because he's comparing himself to like certain people, he thought that he's like poor and unsuccessful. He was like really shocked. So sometimes the numbers can actually really help you, especially if you're one of these people that's anxious and perfectionistic, and, you're always subconsciously comparing the situation to a best case scenario. And I'll talk about why you do this. I'm sure you can guess why you do it if you've listened to my podcast long enough. But anyway, so the expectations with parents, I try to look at the norms. These are the norms for how kids act. And norms, it's a normal distribution. So, the average kid is not getting all A's. They're just not. Think about that. How could they? That doesn't make any sense. It's like that finding that most people think they have above average sense of humor. No, they don't. That's impossible, right? So most kids are not getting all A's. Most kids are getting whatever the average is. A C, a B, it depends on the district. But it's certainly not all A's, right? And so what about in terms of being pleasant and loving and all these things? So many people are shocked when I'm like, oh, adolescents aren't supposed to be nice. They're supposed to have what we call developmentally appropriate adolescent narcissism. They're supposed to kind of be assholes because they're getting ready to individuate from you. They want to be their own person. Evolutionarily, they're not supposed to live with you anymore. They're supposed to have their own family. So, of course, they don't want you to tell them what to do. I understand they're stupid. They don't know what this or that is. Fine. This is another thing. Everybody thinks that they have the only stupid teenager. And I'm not being mean. I'm just saying they don't know things, obviously, because they're not older. And you're forgetting what you didn't know when you were that age. Conveniently, you're forgetting it. You're not doing apples to apples. So kids have been, young people are stupid in all generations. You could go back to the advent of the first printed book is probably something about people disappointed in their children not being mature enough. There was some funny thing I saw where it went all the way back to like 18 something. And it was saying, it was showing the quote from the newspapers that says young people don't know how to work anymore. And it was saying it all the way back every 10 years to like 1800 and, 70 something. So obviously every generation thinks that teenagers are stupid. They're supposed to be, they don't know as much as you do, right? But they are supposed to also individuate and therefore not be wonderful. They're not loving the way that they were when they were little. And so also when people have toddlers, psychoeducation, which just means learning about psychological phenomenon, is something that we do frequently in therapy, can really help. I've talked to you guys before, or at least I've talked to clients, I always use this example, that child abuse rates go down among teen moms with just an intervention of teaching them about babies. Like literally, the baby isn't crying to hurt you. The babies cry to communicate. All babies cry. Like you can't shake the baby because that does this to the baby's brain. And also the baby is meant to cry. Just basic stuff that like you would think is obvious. It's not obvious. They're young. They're children themselves. So they think the baby knows that I didn't sleep and she's crying anyway. Well, then you get mad if that's your interpretation, right? So basically, the first thing you have to do is to compare yourself to an average person, your child to an average child. Or you could, if you really want to be great and really change your frame, compare them to your friend with the worst behaved child. That's what happy people do. And it doesn't sound great when you put it out there, but that's also called being grateful, there but for the grace of God go I, etc. Instinctively, people that are happier people, they think about how well they're doing. So they pick comparison points that allow for expectations that are achievable. Because your kid is better than the worst kid that the worst behaved kid, the kid that's lighting stuff on fire, et cetera, et cetera. Even if your kid lights stuff on fire, there's somebody in whatever program you've taken them to that lights more things on fire, et cetera, and so forth. Then, of course, there's your partner. People's expectations for their partner are very mobile. They change based on what anecdote they heard that day. So if a guy somehow, and this is why porn is so terrible, because it's basically like priming guys' expectations in their head all the time that they're supposed to be having sex. Everybody's having sex. We're all having sex. It turns on that sex switch, because they're seeing it all the time. And I talk about how bad porn is for marriage over and over, so I don't need to go down that rabbit hole right now. But if a guy, like let's say a guy is on the subway and he sees a married couple kissing, he doesn't think, look at their rings. Are they even married to each other? Is this an affair? Did they just get married 2 weeks ago? Is this like a very random occurrence for them? No, he's going to think everybody acts like this. My wife is the only cold fish, right? And so then his expectations for her are going to be more like the woman on the subway. And of course, when women watch romantic comedies or read romance novels, then their expectation is that the husband's going to be so romantic. So they're comparing him, and instead they should be comparing him to a bad husband, or at least an average husband. What does an average husband do? How many poems does an average husband write in a week? 0. In a month? 0. In a year? 0. So, it's like, but in romance novels, they write them all the time, and they do plenty of other stuff to boot. So if you're comparing your partner to somebody who is amazing, then your expectations of them are not going to be realistic. And now, of course, there's the expectations for yourself. When you're depressed, you have negative thoughts about self, world, and future. I've told you guys that's the depressive cognitive triad. So it's low self-esteem, basically. When you're depressed, you have low self-esteem. So then you expect yourself to be 1,000 times better than you are. You can't imagine why you're such a piece of shit. You tell yourself you have all these possibilities, all these opportunities, all this potential. You're squandering it. You don't have any self-compassion. So instead of saying, man, for somebody that was raised in a dysfunctional family, I did pretty good, I went to school and here I am. I got this job. I make pretty good money. You say, man, I'm so unsuccessful. I compare myself to my brother. He's the same house. You forget that he was the oldest child. He got all these resources. He has different temperament, etc. And he makes so much more money than me. God, I'm such a piece of shit. And you know what? The guy down the street, he just got a new car. So then he must be doing better than me. And you don't think, what about all the guys that didn't get new cars? Why are your expectations for yourself? They're stealing any joy you could have. You don't think, man, you know what? I could be doing so much worse. And that's what you may need to do if you want to be able to be happy, because you need to be able to teach this to your children too. Because where did you learn it? Well, as I tell you, with everything, you learn it at home. Your parents were likely always had expectations that were impossible for you to fill, for themselves, for each other, and for you. And so then you learn that people are supposed to expect each other and themselves to be better than they are. And life is just kind of just smacks you in the face over and over again with how you're not where you are expected to be. And any comparison point should always be the top of the line. Maybe even people on television, celebrity marriages, like just things that are just completely unattainable, but you don't think of it like that. You think, oh yeah, but I should be doing better. I should be more like that person, and so therapy can really, really help you switch the frame. It can help you understand that your expectations for yourself are hurting you, and your expectations for your children honestly may be hurting them if this is what you learn to do at home. And overall, your marriage is hurt, your work performance, your friendships. Some people expect their friends to go so much out of the way for them. This is actually a big one, so I'll give it its own couple of minutes. People are like, oh, my friends never asked me to hang out. Like, how often you expect your friends to think about hanging out when they got their whole life? Sometimes it's so interesting. I'll be like, so let's picture your friend. Like, do you actually, what do you think they're doing in a day? Oh, well, I know, right now she's taking care of her mother. Her mother's sick. And then, she does have the 3 children. And I think she did start a new job. I think she mentioned that. I'm like, this woman sounds incredibly busy, overwhelmed, and stressed. If you want to reach out and say hello, great. But she's not thinking about you, and that's totally normal. Then sometimes people are like, but I think about my friends all the time. Even if I'm busy, I think about them. Sometimes I even go through the phone. I'm like, oh, what happened here? Seems to be 3 weeks that you didn't text this person. Oh, that was the start of the school year. Well, what if they were sitting there talking to their therapist at that moment being like, she hates me? I mean, people have a very, very difficult time, especially when they're not raised with empathy, to empathize. And some of this expectations and comparison stuff is about a lack of empathy. You're not empathizing sometimes with yourself, and you're not empathizing other times with other people. So with your kid, sometimes it could be really sobering to think, man, what would it be like to have a parent who always expected you to act better? Sometimes you're like, well, shit, I did, that's why I act like that with my kid. And, or what would it be like to be married to me? Are my standards really too high? Now, people who are in healthier marriages are able to kind of understand this, not by magic, but because either through therapy or through modeling on their own parents, they're able to kind of have what we in DBT, dialectical behavior therapy, calls wise mind. You're able to kind of look in objectively at yourself. So sometimes, a woman will say something like, or a man will say something like, I'm somebody with high standards. That's a thing, and I'm always working on it so that I don't, hurt my friends and family and my kids, because I know I have very high standards, so I could be difficult. That is at least somebody's working on something, so that you have high standards. You're trying to work on it. Basically, you're saying my expectations may not concord with reality. So I try to keep that in mind, and I kind of control for that variable. Not all the time, but like a person who's made strides like that in therapy, or who's able to think like that because it was modeled for them, let's say. Or sometimes as guys get more successful, the guys that I see in therapy, they've had coaching. They've had business coaching. I mean, I do coaching too, but a lot of them have come in after they've had executive coaching. And then, man, do they know their weaknesses. It's like their favorite thing to talk about because it's been inculcated in them that they have to be aware of their weaknesses. I have a whole podcast on this. The more successful a man is, the more coachable he is. And they're like, oh yeah, here's all the things I struggle with. I have very high standards. I could be difficult when I'm stressed. I lack empathy. It's like they're thrilled to tell me about it. And that person then in the moment sometimes is better, many times, is better able to control for that variable in what they expect from others versus somebody who's living in the darkness of Plato's cave and has no self-awareness. So they could let's say they get the report card from their son. They're like, man, why is this like this? C, I thought you would have come to me before you would get a C in math. And then they could take a step back and be like, all right, I'm sorry. I yelled. Moving forward, how are we going to fix this? You're a good kid, whatever. I'm sorry I yelled at you. What happened here, though? How can we help how can we help move forward? Versus somebody who's never interrogated this in therapy, coaching, or otherwise, that's like, why are you like this? What do you think's going to happen to you in college? Why are we even saving for college at this rate? You don't seem to care about anything but sitting around and gaming. What's wrong with you? Man, what a disappointment. And then that relationship suffers a lot. The obvious expectations of that father were not, the kid did not fulfill those expectations, and then people will compare. They'll be like, your brother didn't have these problems. What is it? What's wrong with you, basically? And then you end up hurting the relationship with the child a lot. Because they realize that they are a disappointment, that they haven't met expectations. And this is like a really big thing that people talk about in later life in therapy, as I was never able to meet my parents' expectations. Well, why don't you get in on that right away and go back against that possibility by working on your expectations in the first place? And using this podcast as kind of an epiphany moment to say, what are my expectations for myself, for my kids, for my partner, maybe for friends, etc., boss, whoever, and what would it be if I changed my expectations, if I changed my comparison points, and if I gave everybody some more grace and normative expectations that take into account that nobody's perfect, nobody's expected to be perfect. When I see people who are perfect supposedly around me, I have absolutely no idea what their life is like internally, and all I do by comparing myself to others is give myself and everybody around me impossible expectations that can then sabotage the closeness and connection in my relationships. All right, guys, I hope you found this useful. Please do subscribe. Thanks for listening, and I'll talk to y'all soon. Have a great day.